I want to share with the Olam here tonight an idea that I first heard from my own Rosh Hashanah, the main thrust of it, and I found it quite disconcerting because I felt put a tremendous responsibility and onus upon me for self-reflection. And I want to share with you because I think that's what we're all doing here. We're here to be mefashpesh ma'aseinu. We're here to have introspection, to be objective in terms of what it is that we do and what exactly is, how do we define our relationship with Hashem. We know that before Hashem asked the question that we seem to have it backwards. In Rosh Hashanah we get judged, and on Yom Kippur we do tshuva. Right? We ask for forgiveness. It would have made more sense. Let's get judged first, and then be able to show up with a clean slate. Let's do tshuva first, and then come and show up with a clean slate, and then get judged. Why do we get judged first? So, anybody that has had the unfortunate experience to be involved in marriage counseling or in any type of reconciliation, know that when you have two parties that might not be seeing eye to eye, the first thing you have to do is make a commitment to want there to be a relationship. If you walk into the room and you just start saying, you did this to me and you did that to me, and you're dead in the water. First thing is, I want there to be a relationship. Once there's agreement that we want that relationship, then we can go back and say, okay, well, how do we fix this problem and how do we fix that problem? And then we have that greater level of introspection and uncovering layers and surfaces of what it is that we do and why we do it and what we think and what is our intent. And that's really, I want to examine that to a certain extent because I think that's really, we've gone through a Rosh Hashanah, we've all made the commitment, we want to have a relationship with God. Hashem hu Malkeinu, God is our king, we've accepted God as our king. Now we have to uncover some of the layers in terms of what it is that we do, why it is what we do. There is, I think, one of the more difficult concepts to understand brought up in this week's Torah, in Parshas Hazinu. Let me share with you the verse and then how Rashi interprets it according to Chazal. The verse says, Hatzur tamim po'alo. Hatzur, the rock. God is the rock. Tamim po'alo. Perfect is his work. His system of this world, the way the world is created, is perfection. Kol derachav mishpat. All his ways are just. Keil emuna, he is a faithful God. Ve'ein avel, and there's no perversion. What does that mean? That God is perfect and there is no perversion? So Rashi says as follows. God is perfect. The righteous that do mitzvahs, they get rewarded for their mitzvahs. They're just going to have to wait a little bit. It comes in the world to come. And the wicked, ein avel, there's no perversion of justice, because even the wicked, for the mitzvahs they do, they're also going to get rewarded. Just where does that reward take place? It takes place in this world. And this is the perfect system. That's how the verse prefaces it. Tzaddik v'yashar kol derachav mishpat. This is perfection. So the question that is raised, which I think is a very difficult question, is why in fact do the righteous not get reward for their mitzvahs in this world? And that's actually based on a Talmudic dictum that says, Schar mitzvahs b'hai al maleka. There is no real reward for mitzvahs in this world. You get the derivatives, the payrolls we can get in certain cases, but the full thrust of reward for the actions we do, the good deeds we do, will only be in the world to come. Why? Why is there that delay? And the answer, I think the real answer to this question has to be the following. When a person does a mitzvah, when a person does a good deed, then what's happening is he is connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the way we connect to the Almighty. Now, the Almighty is infinite. The Almighty is eternal, which means in order to connect to Him, you're doing something that's infinite. You're doing something that's eternal. Well, if you're doing an eternal or an infinite act, you can't be rewarded in this world. Because in this world, by definition, anything that is in this world, it's finite. It's here today and it's gone tomorrow. So in order to be rewarded for an infinite act, you can only be rewarded in the infinite world, in the eternal world, which is Olam Haba, which is the world to come. That's why true reward cannot be in this world. It has to be in the world to come. So when you bench lulav, or you put on tefillin, or you give tzedakah, the real reward for that's an eternal act, has to be in the world to come. So the obvious question is, then how can the wicked, who also, when they bench lulav and they put on tefillin and they give tzedakah, how can they be rewarded in this world? If we said that the equality of the reward cannot be done in the gift given in this world because it's not eternal, it's finite, then how can we give the wicked their reward in this world? So some I saw in Sfarim brought down answer that the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way the Almighty sets up a system, He rewards people based on what they consider to be important. But I don't think that's a valid answer. I don't think that's just. Let's assume you deal in metals, and someone comes into your store, brings this beautiful silver candelabra, and wants to sell it to you. And let's say, what's silver going today? $20 an ounce, right? Just selling $20 an ounce. But you do the metal test, and you see that the metal comes off, and really underneath it is gold. Now, gold is going $1,000 an ounce. Is it fair? Is it the moral thing to do to sell it to him based on what he thinks it is? Or do you have to let him know, Rabbi, this is not silver, this is gold. And really, I owe you a lot more money than if it would be silver. There's no question. It's wrong to let him think it's silver. You have to tell him that this is gold. So even if the wicked don't appreciate what this world is, what the reward is, they don't know. After 120, they're going to realize that. So how could it be the perfect, just system to reward them in this world if you can't even compare? The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says that a sniff of the world to come is equal to all of the pleasures of this world. How is that just? How could we? This is giving the example. How is it just to reward the wicked for their mitzvos when they take a lulav, when they put on tefillin, when they tzedakah? How can we say it's just to give it to them in this world? It does not seem. That answer, I think, is sorely lacking. Let's see if we can come up with another answer. So that's the first question I want to deal with. The second question that I'd like to see if we can get an insight to. Seres Mei Tshuva, we are focusing on making sure that if we were not signed in the book of the righteous by Rosh Hashanah, we have some time now to get our act together, and Yom Kippur, hopefully, we will then be signed and sealed in the book of life. The Rambam, Maimonides, when he defines the difference between a tzaddik and a rasha, he says it's one mitzvah. If you have one mitzvah more than Aveirus, exactly how it weighs out, then you become a tzaddik. One Aveira more, then you're a rasha. I mean, what does that mean? I want to get some insight in what does it mean that there's like 1% or a mitzvah more that tips the scale. So right now if we haven't been judged and sealed in any book yet, so we're in the middle, and now we have a chance to tip the scale. What does that mean? What does it mean that one mitzvah tips the scale? One last question. The Talmud in the beginning of Maseches Avodah Zarah, Daf Beis, says an unbelievable thing. It says that after the Melchemes Gog and Magog, after Armageddon, and God will ascend the throne, exactly what it means, maybe Melech HaMashiach will ascend the throne, and now we'll start giving the reward. The Olam Haba reward is starting to be doled out. So, and he says, he opens up a Sefer Torah, and he says, whoever kept whatever's in this book, and then you have a right to come get reward. And all the nations of the world are running, saying, we want reward, we want reward. Right? So the Talmud says that God says to them, what do you mean you want reward? So the nations line up, and you have the Romans, and you have the Greeks, everyone's lining up, and they say, one says, we created infrastructure, we created markets, we created bathhouses, we created plumbing, we did all of these things that the Jews can sit and study. So we want to get some reward. And God says to them, I can't give you a reward for that. You didn't do it for yourself. You didn't do it for the Jews. You did it for yourselves. And so it goes through all of these things that they're claiming. God keeps saying, you cannot get reward. You did it for yourselves. So that's the Mishnah. That's the Gemara in the beginning of Masechah Avodah Zarah. So God says, you didn't do it. You did it for yourselves. I can't give you reward. What's the difficulty that I have? I heard a beautiful idea. I've said it many times from my Rosh Hashanah. Moshe Rabbeinu is marching through the desert. It's got 3 million people. There's a covenant that they're going to get the land of Israel. He defeats the king of the Amorites, Sichon, completely wipes him out. Gets to the boundary of Sichon's brother. Who's Sichon's brother? Og. And Moshe stops. So it says that Moshe was afraid. So God says, don't be afraid. So Rashi says, what is Moshe afraid of? You've wiped everybody else till now, you've wiped out. What are you afraid of Og? What are you stopping? So Rashi is an unbelievable thing. He says that he was afraid that, Og did a good deed. Og did something, he did a mitzvah, he did a very good deed, and maybe the reward for that would not allow the Jewish people to be successful cutting through his land. What was the great deed that he did? So if you go back to the beginning of Bereshis, you go back into Parshas Vayera, I believe in Vayera in Bereshis, Lech Lecha, in Bereshis, it says there that there was a first world war, 4 kings against the 5 kings, and Avram's nephew was captured. Avram's nephew was captured, that's Lot, and it says, Vayava HaPolit, the refugee, the one who escaped from the war, came and notified Avram that your nephew was captured. And Avram gathered together Eliezer or the 318 people, whoever he had with him, and he went to war to try and save his nephew, which he was successful. Who was the person that came and told Avram that your nephew was captured? Who was that? That was Og. He did it. So the reward for that great, because remember, we got tremendous benefit from that. From Lot came Mashiach. Moab. So we have, Avram was afraid, so no, it says Moshe was afraid that he was going to, the reward for his act would not allow him to be successful. Now, Rashi, if we know a Rashi in Chumash, Moshe Rabbeinu knew it too. And Rashi tells us what was the motivation, what was the intent, why, all of a sudden he became this big righteous person that's going to tell Avram. He had nefarious intentions. It says that Sarah Imenu, right? Our matriarch Sarah was one of the 4 beautiful women in the world. And Og had his eye on her. But he knew as long as Avram's alive, he doesn't have a shot. So what did he figure? There's no way Avram can be victorious over the 4 kings. I'm going to tell him he's going to go die in the war, and I'm going to take Sarah. That was his evil intent. How could Moshe Rabbeinu worry that Og would be that Og is going to be rewarded in such a way that the Jewish people can't get across his land? The intent was such a terrible and evil intent. So my Rosh Hashanah said such an important message in terms of relationships. He says, when someone has done something that you've benefited from, you don't have a right to focus on their intent. You just have a right to focus on the benefit you received. When someone has done something for you, focus on the benefit you receive. Don't focus on the intent. The human condition is the opposite, by the way. Anytime somebody does something good for us, we're trying to figure out why and what they're doing, because that way it negates our feeling beholden to them, because then we don't have to worry about thanking them or feeling beholden, because they really did it for their own reasons. No, that's not the way. You need to focus on the benefit you received. Don't focus on the intent behind the act. What you received is worthy of them being rewarded for what they did to you. If so, let's go back to the story with the nations of the world. There's no question we benefited from the plumbing, and we benefited from the bathhouses, and we benefited from the markets. We benefit from all those things. How is it possible that God says to them, oh, you did it for yourselves, I can't give you reward? That's contradicting the message we have by Moshe. The message by Moshe is that you have to get rewarded for what you do. Don't focus on the intent. And here God is doing the opposite. There is one of the commentaries on the Talmud, his name is Ritva, Rabbi Yom Tevashvili, and he makes a comment. Now, and he's a Rishon. When the Rishon, 12th, 13th century, when he makes a comment, he doesn't make comments that any of us could say, which, we don't even know half the times what we're talking about. When a Rishon says something, we need to look at it and analyze the depth and the profundity of what's being said. He's going on, the Gemara Pesachim talks about that there is an obligation the rabbis established to make a blessing on mitzvahs. You have to make a blessing. Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you Hashem, who sanctified us and commanded us to perform, take the lulav, put on tefillin, etc. So he says, why is this? Why do we have a bracha on mitzvahs? On food, I understand why you need a blessing, right? God, we shouldn't take from God's world without thanking Him. But why do you have to do it on mitzvahs? He says something is because you have to realize when you do the mitzvah, you're doing it for God. I just spent $100 on an esrog. What do you mean? $20 a pound on flour for. If I wasn't instructed to do it, I wouldn't be spending all that money. So what do you mean? I have to be told. And that's probably the reason the Shem Yichud, that the Hasidim, they have this whole thing. I'm doing it for Hashem. Of course I'm doing it for Hashem. I need a bracha to remind me I'm doing it for Hashem. You see from here an unbelievable idea. Is that unfortunately, most of us when we do mitzvahs, we don't necessarily do it for God. There's many other reasons why people will do mitzvahs. It's a social accepted thing to do. It makes me feel good. I'm doing it by route. I don't always do it because God is instructing me to do it. Therefore, Chazal told us, you need a bracha to tell you that is why you have to do it. Because God is instructing you to do it. So that's a deep thought, because let's step back ourselves. Next time we do a mitzvah, why are we doing this? Make the bracha think that's why I'm doing it, because God is instructing me to go ahead and do it. But that's not always the case. Now, the truth is, everything we do is a confluence of different reasons. Some is for ourselves, some is because God instructed us. I think that's what the Rambam's telling us. The Rambam is saying is the difference between a tzaddik and a rasha is, what is the majority of the intent? Is it mostly for ourselves, for our own self-gratification? Or is it mostly because of God? It doesn't have to be 100%, but it has to be even a little bit more. The way it's reflected, are you doing more good things than bad things? But in terms of each act itself, it's reflected in the intent of what the person is doing. And why is that critical? The Ram says that's different from Rosh and Tzaddik. Am I doing it for him, or am I doing it for myself? I think this is the message, and I think this is a very, very scary thing. Our question we asked was, why do we get the wicked rewarded in this world for the same act that they're doing as the righteous do, and they get their reward in the world to come? When it's obviously the difference is it's enormous. It's eternal act, or it's a reward that's not eternal. It must be telling us the following thing, which is a very scary thing. A mitzvah that is not done with the majority of the intent being for God, we've just taken an eternal act and we've made it into a finite one. If a person is not having the majority of his intent that I'm doing this is because God is instructing me to do it, but I'm doing more for my instruction, you've done a good thing, but you've done it for yourself. You've made it finite. It's not infinite. Once you've made it finite, you know where that reward has to be? That reward has to be in this world. So you get rewarded for what you did. But if you want to get Olam Haba reward, Olam Haba, the intent there is important, that you're doing it for God. It's a very, very scary thought. Because we have to reflect on our own lives. Why do we do what we do? We have to do it, can't be 100%. You don't have to have 100%. One degree more for God makes us righteous. But that's what has to be there. And I want to say that perhaps that's what it means as well. Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid that Og would get reward and it would not allow him to cross through. That was happening in this world. In this world, you don't focus on the intent. The intent is not important as just the act. And therefore, he could have been rewarded for it. And Moshe was afraid that he was going to get rewarded for his act that would not allow him to go through. But when the nations of the world are coming to God, in the Masechet Avodah Zarah, they want to get their Olam Haba reward. In order for what they did to be considered a worthy of Olam Haba reward, their intent makes a difference. It can only be an Olam Haba reward if it was an eternal act. Eternal act, you had to do it not for yourself. God tells them, you guys did it for yourself. I cannot reward you for what you've done in Olam Haba. Your reward came in this world. So just to take away 2 points. Number one is, people do things for us. We need to focus on the benefit received. Don't focus on intent. In terms of our own actions, we want to make them eternal actions. We want to connect to God through them. The focus needs to be primarily, I'm doing it because God is instructing me to do it, because I want to get close to Him. I want to connect to Him by doing that act. It'll become, therefore, the act of a righteous person. It'll be eternal, and please God will be zocheh to getting eternal reward for it as well. Chasima Tova.